The sound that finally broke our marriage wasn't a shout. It was smaller than that. It was the soft, wet sound of my husband, Curtis, sipping his coffee on a Sunday afternoon. A little intake of breath, a quiet affirmation into a ceramic mug, a sound he made 100 times a day. But this time, it was an endorsement. It was a co-signature on my erasure. Across the dining room table, his mother Henrietta's hand was flat on the polished wood, a general planting a flag on conquered territory. Her voice was low, devoid of heat, which made it colder than any scream. "Leave then," she said, her eyes on mine. "Don't come back. This is my son's house. You were always just visiting." And in the silence that followed, Curtis sipped his coffee. That small, agreeing sound was the only answer he gave. In that moment, the air in the room didn't just change, it solidified. I felt it press against my skin, the sudden immense weight of a truth I had spent years refusing to carry. The smell of the pot roast I had put in the oven that morning, a smell that had always meant home, suddenly smelled like fuel for a machine that was consuming me. "My name is Maxine. I am 35 years old, and I am a commercial real estate analyst. Curtis, my husband of 8 years, was 39. For a living, I assess risk. I look at a building, a portfolio, a plot of land, and I see the invisible structures holding it up or setting it up to fail. I analyze load-bearing walls, foundational integrity, revenue streams, and long-term liabilities. I spend my days quantifying the stability of things that look, to the untrained eye, merely like brick and steel. For 8 years, I had treated my marriage as a premium asset, a legacy property. I believed its foundation was solid, that it was a joint venture built on shared trust and mutual investment. I had overlooked the cracks in the facade, the slow erosion of the soil beneath. A good analyst knows that a structure doesn't collapse overnight. It fails slowly, quietly, one compromised beam at a time, until a single ordinary stress, a Sunday dinner, a sip of coffee, reveals that the whole thing was only ever held together by force of habit. The moment played out with the slow, deliberate cruelty of a choreographed scene. We were finishing dinner. It was the table Henrietta had insisted we buy 6 months after she moved in, a heavy, dark wood thing that swallowed the light in the room. She sat at the head of it, a position my grandmother had always occupied when she visited. Curtis sat to her right. I sat opposite him, an observer at my own family meal. The argument, if you could call it that, had been trivial. Henrietta had complained about the way I organized the pantry, claiming she couldn't find the paprika she'd bought. It wasn't a request for help. It was a statement of my incompetence. I had responded calmly, my voice even. "It's on the second shelf, Henrietta, with the other spices. They're alphabetical." She had pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. "That's a foolish way to organize a kitchen. A woman should know her own pantry by heart, not by alphabet." Curtis had shifted in his seat, a tell I knew well. It was his preemptive retreat. He was preparing to broker a peace that would cost me something. "Mama," he started, his voice placating. "Max is just organized, that's all." "She's particular," Henrietta corrected, her voice slicing through his. "Particular in another woman's home." And there it was. Not the first time she'd said it, but the first time I refused to let it slide. I set my fork down, the clink of metal on ceramic unnaturally loud. "This is my home, Henrietta." Her eyes, so much like her son's but harder, colder, met mine. That's when she laid her hand flat on the table. "Is it? You pay the bills, I'll give you that. But this is Curtis's home, my son's home. You're just living in it." I looked at Curtis. I waited for him to defend the use we had built. I waited for him to draw a boundary to protect the foundation of our marriage. Instead, he picked up his coffee cup. He avoided my gaze, focusing on the dark liquid as if it held some profound answer. "Leave then," Henrietta said, her voice dropping to that eerily calm register. "If you don't like the way this house is run, don't come back. This is my son's house. You were always just visiting." The silence stretched, thin and suffocating, and in that silence, Curtis brought the mug to his lips. He sipped. The sound was a period at the end of his mother's sentence. It was a signature on a document I hadn't been allowed to read. It wasn't her words that broke me. It was his silence. Her cruelty was a weather event, a storm that passed. His silence was the climate, the air I had been breathing for years without realizing it was slowly starving me of oxygen. The archaeology of our disrespect began not with a bang, but with a plea. 2 years prior, Henrietta's husband had passed, and she had sold her small home in Greensboro. The plan was for her to stay with us for a few months while she found a condo in Charlotte. I'd agreed without hesitation. She was his mother. She was grieving. I cleared out the second bedroom, which I had used as a home office, and bought new linens, a small television, everything to make her feel welcome. The first month was fine. The second month, she started making small changes. She replaced my favorite coffee mugs with a mismatched set from a thrift store because she liked a cup with character. She rearranged the living room furniture while I was at work, claiming it improved the flow. Each change was a small push against the boundaries of my home, a test to see if I would push back. I didn't. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself she was grieving. After 6 months, I found a few promising condo listings and showed them to Curtis. He'd glanced at the printouts before setting them aside. "Let's give it some more time, Max," he'd said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Mama just feels safer here. Give her the year." A year. It felt like a lifetime. But I loved my husband. I had built my life on the idea that love required flexibility, that it meant absorbing the unexpected pressures. I was a good wife. I was accommodating. So I agreed. The year came and went. Henrietta's clothes filled the closet in the guest room. Her mail started arriving with our address permanently listed. Her opinions, once offered tentatively, became directives. The duplex wasn't our home anymore. It was the house where I lived with my husband and his mother. Curtis's passivity was the soil in which his mother's entitlement grew. He outsourced the difficult conversations, the emotional labor, the very administration of our life together, to me. This pattern had been set long before she moved in. It was cemented 4 years ago, on the day we bought the duplex. It had been my idea. My bonus that year was substantial, and I had been tracking a pocket of Plaza Midwood where property values were set to explode. I found a duplex, a little worn but with solid bones, that I knew was a golden opportunity. I ran the numbers, created a projection for rental income from the second unit, and presented it to Curtis. He was enthusiastic in the way a passenger is enthusiastic about a trip they didn't have to plan. "It sounds great, babe. You're the smart one with this stuff." He called my analysis our plan, but when it came time to execute, the we dissolved. I liquidated stock from a portfolio I'd had since before we were married for the down payment. I filled out the mortgage application, my credit score and salary securing the loan. The underwriting was entirely in my name. Curtis was at a sales conference in Atlanta the week of the closing. "I can't get out of it, Max," he'd said over the phone, his voice tinny with false regret. "You're the one who's good with the paperwork side. Handle it however." So I did. I sat alone in the lawyer's conference room, the air thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. I signed my name, Maxine Dubois, over and over again. My hand ached by the end. The deed, the mortgage, the title, all of it bore one name, mine. I remember the lawyer, a kind-faced man named Mr. Abernathy, looking at me over his glasses. "Congratulations, Mrs. Dubois. You're a homeowner." I had corrected him gently. "Just Maxine is fine." That night, I walked through the empty duplex, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I ran my hand along the cool plaster walls. This was ours. I had made it happen for us. When Curtis called, he asked, "How did it go? Are we landlords now?" "It went fine," I said, looking out the window at the quiet street. "We are." I see now that his "we" was a blanket he threw over my work. He was happy to be warm, but he had no interest in learning how to weave. For the next 4 years, I managed the property. I set up an LLC to process the rental income from the upstairs unit, a buffer to protect our personal finances. I filed the quarterly taxes. I vetted the tenants. When the woman in 2B, a young nurse, was late on rent because her hours got cut, I worked out a payment plan with her. I handled the midnight call when her water heater broke, coordinating with a plumber while Curtis slept soundly beside me. He enjoyed the performance of being a landlord. When his friends came over for cookouts, he'd lean against the porch railing, beer in hand, and talk about his property. "Yeah, the market in this neighborhood is crazy," he'd say. "We got in at just the right time." He spoke of the rental income as our passive revenue stream, though he never once asked to see the accounts. He didn't know the name of our tenant. He didn't know the name of our plumber. He just knew that owning the duplex made him look successful, responsible. He had outsourced the reality of the investment to me and kept the image for himself. The contamination of memory is a subtle poison. A moment that once felt warm and loving, viewed through the lens of a new truth, becomes tainted. I remember our first anniversary in the house. Curtis had surprised me. He'd filled the living room with candles and cooked my favorite meal, shrimp and grits. He raised his glass of champagne. "To Maxine," he'd said, his eyes shining, "for making this all happen, for making everything so easy." I had glowed. I felt seen, appreciated. Now, I hear those words for what they were. It wasn't a tribute. It was a customer review. He wasn't praising my partnership. He was praising my efficiency. I made his life easy. I was good infrastructure. I was a well-managed asset that produced a reliable return. Love for him was the comfortable dividend of my labor. Henrietta's presence only amplified this dynamic. She saw my competence not as a contribution, but as a temporary service. She began to treat me like a property manager, not a daughter-in-law. She would leave notes on the counter. "Upstairs toilet is running. See to it. The front porch light is out. Needs replacing." She never asked me to do these things. She instructed me. I tried to talk to Curtis about it. We were in our bedroom, the one space she hadn't yet colonized. I sat on the edge of the bed, my voice quiet. "Curtis, your mother is treating me like an employee." He was scrolling through his phone, half listening. "Oh, Mama doesn't mean anything by it. That's just her way." "Her way is disrespectful," I said, my voice firmer. "She's undermining me in my own home." He finally looked up, his face clouded with a familiar frustration. It wasn't anger at his mother, it was annoyance at me for disturbing his peace. "Max, can you just try to get along with her? She didn't mean it the way it sounded. Mama's been through a lot. Losing Dad was hard on her. She just feels a little lost." His mother's pain became a perpetual excuse, a shield he used to deflect any responsibility for her behavior and any responsibility for protecting me. My feelings were an inconvenience. Her feelings were a justification. I was expected to absorb her grief, her bitterness, her disrespect, because she had been through a lot. It never seemed to occur to him that I might be going through something too. I was the load-bearing wall, expected to stand silent and strong, no matter how much weight he and his mother piled on top of me. This was the history that sat with me at the dining room table, the invisible weight that pressed down as Henrietta declared me a visitor in the life I had built. Curtis's sip of coffee wasn't just a sip of coffee. It was the final signature on a long and detailed contract of my surrender, a contract I had been unknowingly signing every day for years. Every time I paid a bill without complaint, every time I accepted his excuses for his mother, every time I allowed him to say we when he meant you. In my line of work, there's a moment during due diligence when you find the one document, the one line in a 100-page lease, that changes the entire valuation of a property. It's a moment of absolute, cold clarity. The fog of optimism burns away, and you see the asset for what it truly is. All the potential, all the hope, becomes irrelevant in the face of one unassailable fact. For me, that fact was the sound of my husband's silent assent. In that instant, something inside me didn't break. It settled. The frantic energy of trying to hold things together, of trying to be patient and understanding and accommodating, simply ceased. The emotional noise that had been a constant hum in the background of my life went quiet. It was the clean, quiet click of a file being closed. The analysis was complete. The property was compromised beyond repair. The liability, the emotional and spiritual cost of staying, was no longer tenable. It was time to divest. I didn't say another word. I stood up from the table, my movements calm and deliberate. I picked up my plate and Curtis's, carried them to the kitchen, and placed them in the sink. Henrietta watched me, a small triumphant smile playing on her lips. Curtis wouldn't look at me at all. He was staring at the dregs of his coffee. I walked past them, up the stairs to our bedroom. I took a duffel bag from the top of the closet. I didn't pack frantically. I moved with a strange, almost serene efficiency. I was no longer a wife leaving her husband. I was an analyst executing an exit strategy. I packed 3 days' worth of clothes, my laptop, my work files, and the toiletries from my side of the sink. I looked at the framed photo on our nightstand, a picture from our honeymoon in Jamaica. We were smiling, brown-skinned and beautiful against the impossible blue of the Caribbean. I felt a pang, not of loss for the man in the picture, but of sadness for the woman. She had believed so fiercely in the dream. She hadn't known how to read the fine print. I left the photo where it was. Before I left the room, I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Underneath a pile of winter sweaters was a large manila envelope. Inside was the original deed to the duplex. I pulled it out. The paper was thick and heavy in my hands. I read the legal description of the property, the parcel number, and the name listed under grantee. Maxine Dubois, a single woman. It was a fact, as solid and unchangeable as concrete. I slid the deed back into its envelope and placed the envelope in the top drawer of the nightstand on Curtis's side of the bed. I didn't hide it. I didn't take it with me. I left it where it had always lived, a quiet paper testament to a truth he had chosen to ignore. The truth would wait for him. I walked downstairs. The pot roast was still in the oven, its rich scent filling the house. Henrietta was now in the living room, watching television as if nothing had happened. Curtis was still at the table, a statue of avoidance. He didn't look up as I walked past him toward the front door. My keys were in my hand. My duffel bag was over my shoulder. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't offer an ultimatum. The time for negotiation was over. I had already left, hours ago, while sitting at the dinner table. This was just the physical manifestation. I opened the front door, stepped out into the cool Charlotte night, and closed it quietly behind me. The click of the lock was the only goodbye I needed. I drove to my sister's apartment in Noda, the city lights smearing across my windshield. I didn't cry. The feeling inside me was a strange, hollow calm. It was the feeling of a long and painful task finally being completed. When I got to Sarah's, she opened the door, took one look at my face and the duffel bag in my hand, and simply said, "It's about damn time." She didn't ask questions. She just hugged me, then led me to her spare room. She had been the steady witness to my slow erosion, the one person who saw the cracks I kept trying to patch over. Her validation was a quiet comfort. My phone started buzzing around 10 o'clock. The first text from Curtis was simple. "Where are you?" An hour later, a second. "Max, pick up the phone." Then the calls started. I watched his name flash on the screen once, twice, 10 times. I let each one go to voicemail. I knew the stages of his emotional process because they were as predictable as a quarterly report. First, confusion, then anger, then negotiation. The angry voicemail arrived around midnight. "What is this, Max? You just walk out? No explanation? After everything I do for you, for us? This is so damn dramatic. Whatever Mama said, you know she didn't mean it. You need to stop being so sensitive and come home. Everything I do for you." The words hung in the air. He truly believed it. He believed his presence, his passive existence in the home I managed, was a contribution. I deleted the message. The next day, Henrietta called. I ignored it. She left a long, rambling voicemail, a master class in passive aggression. She spoke of her love for her son, of how hard he worked, of how he needed a supportive wife, not one who ran away at the first sign of trouble. She painted me as a flighty, ungrateful child. It was a performance for an audience of one, designed to activate my guilt. It didn't work. The part of me that was susceptible to her manipulation had been cauterized. On Monday, while sitting at my sister's kitchen table, an email popped up on my laptop. It was from Maria, the tenant in 2B. "Hi, Maxine. Hope you're well. Just wanted to let you know the dishwasher is making a weird noise and leaking a little from the bottom. Let me know how you want to handle it. Thanks." For a moment, I considered forwarding it to Curtis. Let him handle it. Let him figure out who to call, how to pay for it, how to coordinate the repair. But that would be an act of revenge, and I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in order. I was interested in closing this chapter of my life with the same professional competence with which I had lived it. I replied to Maria, telling her I was on it. I emailed my go-to contractor, the one whose number was saved in my phone, not Curtis's. I approved the work order and paid the invoice from my personal account, the same account into which the rental income was deposited. It was a simple, seamless transaction. A problem arose, and I solved it. It was what I did. It was who I was. Curtis didn't even know the dishwasher was broken. He didn't know the dishwasher existed as anything other than a box in a wall that cleaned his plates. He finally got me on the phone on Tuesday. My sister had urged me to talk to him, to at least give him the clarity I had been denied. I took a deep breath and answered, "Max, finally!" He sounded exhausted, a manufactured vulnerability in his voice. "Where are you? I've been worried sick." "I'm fine, Curtis. Fine? You walked out of our house. You won't answer my calls. How is that fine?" "I'm at Sarah's," I said, my voice even. "Clerical." He sighed, a sound of deep frustration. "Look, I know you're mad about what Mama said. She's sorry. She wants to talk to you." "I don't want to talk to her," I said. "And I'm not mad about what she said. I'm leaving because of what you did." "What I did? I didn't do anything." His voice rose, the defensiveness cracking through the performance of concern. "Exactly," I said quietly. "You did nothing. She erased me from my own home, and you co-signed it." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Then he said the words that revealed the true, staggering depth of his delusion. The words that showed me he would never, ever understand. "I didn't think you'd actually do this," he said, his voice now small, almost a whisper. "I didn't think you'd actually treat the property like it wasn't ours together." The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. He was accusing me of the very thing he had done for years. He saw my departure not as a personal, emotional act of self-preservation, but as a hostile business maneuver. He was worried about the asset. I could have screamed. I could have listed every bill I paid, every tax form I filed, every late-night call I handled. But I didn't. I chose one devastatingly simple question. "Who is we, Curtis?" I asked. He was silent. He had no answer, because the we he invoked was a fiction he used to feel powerful. The we was just me, doing the work, while he enjoyed the benefits. "The movers are coming on Saturday," I said, my voice flat. "I'll be there at 9 to get the rest of my things. You and Henrietta can be there or not. It's up to you." I didn't wait for a response. I hung up the phone. The rebuilding of a life, like the renovation of a property, starts with demolition. The Saturday the movers came was a day of quiet, methodical destruction. Curtis and Henrietta were not there. The house was silent, a hollowed-out version of itself. My sister and 2 of my closest friends came to help. We worked like a well-oiled machine, taping boxes, wrapping furniture, moving with a purpose that felt sacred. We didn't talk much. We just worked. As I took my clothes from the closet, I saw the empty space left behind. His suits and shirts seemed to hang there, suddenly foreign. I looked at the bed we had shared, now stripped bare. I felt a wave of grief, but it was for the potential, not the reality. I was mourning the house I thought I was building, not the one I was actually living in. The legal part was surprisingly clean. My lawyer, the same Mr. Abernathy who had handled the closing, was direct and efficient. Because the duplex was solely in my name, purchased with my premarital assets, Curtis had no legal claim to it. He was a resident, not an owner. His name was on the utility bills and the cable, but not on the one document that mattered. We served him and Henrietta with a formal notice to vacate. They had 60 days. I moved into a small, light-filled apartment in South End. It was half the size of the duplex, but it felt twice as large. Every square inch of it was mine. I chose the paint color, a soft, calming gray. I bought a small, comfortable sofa and a coffee table made of reclaimed wood. The first morning I woke up there, the sun streamed through the large windows, and I drank my coffee in complete and utter silence. The quiet wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It was the sound of my own life, undisturbed. I took the capital I had, the equity from the duplex which I immediately put on the market, and I started doing for myself what I had been doing for corporate clients for years. I started underwriting my own portfolio. I found a small fourplex in a neighborhood that was just beginning to turn. I ran the numbers. I saw the potential. I bought it. I spent my weekends painting, fixing leaky faucets, and meeting my new tenants. The work was hard, but it was mine. Every ounce of effort I put in came back to me. There was no one there to claim my labor, to call my work ours. It was just mine, and it was enough. Months passed. The duplex sold quickly and for a significant profit. I received a call from my real estate agent the day after Curtis and Henrietta were supposed to be out. "They're gone," she said, "but they left a bit of a mess. And there's something you should see." She sent me a photo. Taped to the front door of the duplex was the official notice I had posted, a standard form letter for the benefit of any future residents or mail carriers. It was a notice of ownership change. It stated simply that effective on that date, the property at that address was under new management, and all future correspondence should be directed to my LLC. And there, under the heading of landlord/owner, was my name, clearly printed, Maxine Dubois. Someone, I assumed Henrietta, had taken a thick black marker and tried to scratch it out. But the name was still visible underneath the angry scribbles. They had seen it. They had finally been forced to read the fine print. Curtis called me one last time, a few weeks after that. He sounded different. The anger was gone, replaced by a kind of bewildered resignation. He told me he and his mother were staying with his cousin. He said they were looking for an apartment. "I just don't get it, Max," he said, and his voice was genuinely confused. "I never saw any of that paperwork. I didn't realize the lease for the upstairs unit was even in your name. You always just handled that stuff." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. He hadn't been malicious. He had been absent. He had lived his life in a state of willful ignorance, comfortable in the knowledge that I would handle it. My competence had been his refuge, the thing that allowed him to never have to grow up, to never have to take true ownership of his own life. I felt a surge of something that wasn't anger and wasn't quite pity. It was just a sense of profound distance. We were two people who had been speaking different languages for years and had only just realized it. "Yes," I said, and my voice was gentle. "I did." I hung up, and I knew it was the last time we would ever speak. There was nothing left to say. He had finally seen the paperwork. The due diligence was complete. There's a fundamental difference between shelter and home. Shelter is a structure that keeps the rain off your head. Home is a place where you are a partner in the maintenance of its soul. For years, I provided Curtis with shelter. I managed the asset, paid the taxes, tended to the foundation. I did it all so that he could have the feeling of home without the responsibility of it. He thought his presence was enough of a contribution. He thought that by simply existing within the walls I maintained, he had a claim to them. Love isn't a deed you file once and forget about. It's the constant, daily, unglamorous work of upkeep. It's fixing the leaky faucets and taking out the trash and protecting the partnership from intrusions, whether they come from the outside world or your own family. Curtis wanted to be the lord of the manor, but he refused to be its steward. He outsourced the stewardship to me, and in doing so, he turned our marriage into a rental agreement where only one of us was paying. When you leave a place like that, you aren't losing a home. You are foreclosing on a bad investment. You are cutting your losses and freeing up your capital, your time, your energy, your love, to invest in something that will provide a real return, something that will grow, something that is yours. This morning, I sat in the sun-drenched breakfast nook of my own apartment. I was reading the paper and drinking a cup of coffee from a mug that I chose in a quiet that I curated. Outside, the city of Charlotte was waking up. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the sound of a world in motion. I took a sip of my coffee, and the only sound was my own. It was the sound of peace, I could feel the solid foundation beneath my feet. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.